Good evening and welcome to the first Michigan Avenue Forum of 2021. I am Lucy Forster-Smith, Senior Associate Pastor for Leadership Development and Adult Education here at Fourth Presbyterian Church. We're delighted that you have joined us this evening with 5 remarkable religious leaders from Chicagoland. This forum is live streamed from the sanctuary of Fourth Presbyterian Church. The focus of this evening's forum is faith in uncertain times, reflecting on the past, envisioning the future. This aligns with the purpose of the Fourth Church's Michigan Avenue Forum, which is to promote civic engagement within the Chicagoland community by presenting events that feature important thinkers and public leaders. This evening's forum has been in the works for many months with a remarkable group of Fourth Presbyterian Church members who make up the Michigan Avenue Forum Committee. Chairing the committee is Julie Pfeiffer, who is joined by Joy Anderson, John Klum, Hope Daniels, Kim Douglas, and Walter Hansen. Michael Mirza is our adult education support person. Tonight, I am honored to moderate these proceedings. I join my colleague, the Reverend Shannon Kirshner, Fourth Church's senior minister, and one of this evening's panelists in welcoming the other panelists to Fourth. Tonight we welcome Mr. David Crawford, president of McCormick Theological Seminary of Chicago, Reverend Otis Moss III, senior pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ of Chicago, Bishop Horace Smith, MD, pastor of Apostolic Faith Church of Chicago, and the Reverend Dr. Ozzie E. Smith Jr., pastor emeritus of Covenant United Church of Christ in South Holland, Illinois. In a moment, we will begin our deliberations on our chosen topic, but before we do so, I would like for you, our viewers, to know a little bit about how we will proceed. All of the panelists are socially distanced in the sanctuary, and when they speak, they will remove their masks, which they now have on. We will begin with opening personal reflections from each of the panelists, and following that, we will have a conversation with all 5 of them, and then we will end with each panelist giving final comments. My role is to introduce the focus for each portion of this evening's discussion, allowing for presentation, discussion, and certainly inspiration. I will also work to ensure parity among the participants by my role by being something of a timekeeper. But I also know there are times when the Spirit of God is palpably present, and the work of the Spirit is to clarify and stir up. So prayer and perspective are central. So with that, let's begin. We will begin with each of you providing an opening statement reflecting on how these past months of pandemic, issues of racial justice, economic uncertainty, and these past days in the life of this nation have affected your faith personally. So if you could ground your reflections in these 2 questions, what have you learned about faith and humanity from these historic times? And how has life in the pandemic uniquely challenged your faith and understanding of humanity? We'd like to invite Dr. Ozzie Smith, if you would be willing to lead us off, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, and to my distinguished colleagues and all the members and those who are viewing of Fourth Prayers, and I'm delighted to be here. You've asked a deep issue here tonight. 2 events. 2 events happened in my life last year in 2020 when we were supposed, which is usually a good report of vision. I spoke for the Illinois Conference at Techney Towers on clergy wellness. It was the Thursday of March 12th where I had to preach about clergy wellness. I used 1 1 Kings 19 with Elijah the prophet hiding in a cave, and I talked about how Elijah had to hear God's question, "What are you doing here?" And I asked them, "What are we doing here?" Of course, talking about wellness. Are we practicing wellness? Little did I know that unwellness was looming around the corner for all of us. On the way home that night, March the 12th, the governor was talking about shelter in place. I said, "What is that?" He said, "Stay at home." Then came COVID, then the epidemic, then the pandemic, then George Floyd, then Breonna Taylor, and a slowing down that caused America to look at itself. PPP and social distancing, people dying and unable to go to the funerals, unable to have church. It seems that we were late building an ark for this. At least the flood lasted 40 days and a dove showed up. But 2020 and otherwise report of good vision brought blurred vision, distorted vision, blinders for some, and downright denial for others. And as a pastor and a musician, this time of 2020, this pandemic in 2021, where it still lingers, it reminds me of playing on a jazz set where the repertoire for the whole evening are straight ahead tunes. You don't know anything about straight ahead, it's the music that you cannot leave there humming, with changes too fast and too intricate to navigate. And so the changes are spiking changes, joy-denying changes, goal-calling changes, changes that make you want to put your instrument up. Everything must change, and we found out that everything did change. Yet faith has caused me to want to still try. I can still trust God. I can trust my ear to hear the changes, my mind to think about the changes, my eyes to see the changes, and my imagination to think about ways of addressing the changes. I've learned to improvise by faith and not by sight. These changes are in the key of life up tempo. We're all in a cave, and we can't hide. This pandemic has blown the cover off of everything we thought sacred and settled. It's been unsettling. 2020 brought out biblical proportions of responses from outright denial while the pandemic kept on rising to flood levels. At least Noah knew why he was building an ark. But God will still meet us in our caves. COVID-19, or as Pastor Moss preached, COVID-16-19, brought us our own version of cave dwelling. And that was the first shift. But the second shift was a fall meeting of the Illinois Conference of the United Church of Christ, where I had to present on what church planters know. But besides my presentation, it was Susan Beaumont who put a tag on these times. She called it liminal space. Liminal space, not eschatological, already now and not yet, but liminal means not knowing and not knowing when you're going to know. She put a tag on it, a space of ongoing not knowing, a space the likes of which none have seen or imagined since 1918 when there was a pandemic. She said that this space was ripe for tricksters, however, or persons who sound as if they know what they are talking about and where they're going. It's like Forrest Gump in the movie. He was running, and all of a sudden people started following him. And when he got out in the desert, he said, "Well, it's time to go home." And then somebody asked, "What are we going to do?" And that's what happened in 2020 and the previous years, the past 4 years. She said this space was ripe for tricksters. And she said something else that I'll never forget, that these tricksters are able to get in the heads of people as if they know what they're talking about, but are incapable of living in community. I've learned that in dire circumstances, as we have seen, that as people of faith, most persons will rise to the occasions. I've seen an unusual humanity rise. I've seen churches that cannot meet, but who are meeting the needs of the church. Although I retired near the final quarter of 2020, I saw stewardship and ministry make necessary and unplanned adjustments to serve others. In this shutdown, I witnessed an amazing showing up of God's people for duty. The pressure of the times emboldened the presence of the people. Things preached about became praxis. The people had a mind to work, and all hands were on deck. People seem to still be saying, let us start building, rebuilding. Yet, I cannot ignore the Sanballats and the Tobiases who have tried to call us from the wall and tried to build walls while calling us from the wall. White got whiter, black got blacker, brown got browner, race got louder and louder, and I realized that the good, the bad, and the ugly will always rear its ugly head in tough times. But I also realized that the race is not given to the swift or the strong, but to the one who endures to the end.
Smith, if you would please address us.
I want to just congratulate the former speaker who has put in such eloquent words the thoughts that I have tonight, and I'm glad to be a part of this august body and group. And to those out in, again, space and technology, I greet you in the name of Jesus. I want to start out with a scripture. I hope it's not too heavy for people, but I would admit to you that this scripture became alive to me about 3.5 years ago, shortly after an election. And I preached about it for about 4 weeks straight because I really felt it spoke to what was going on among us and certainly should have informed our faith. And at the same time, this scripture brought to my heart a sense of repentance, of the omission of God's will. And it's found in Isaiah chapter 59. I'm reading it from the Revised Standard Version here, beginning with verse number 14. It says, justice is turned back, righteousness stands at a distance, because truth fell in the street. Justice is turned back. The King James says, equity is afraid to enter because truth got shot in the street. He goes on to say this, uprightness cannot enter, truth is lacking, and whoever turns from evil is despoiled. And the Lord saw it. It displeased him that there was no justice. And so if I would frame my remarks and my faith with a statement that the casualty is truth. Whether it's a biologic pandemic of COVID-19, whether it's a pandemic of injustice in this country and around the world, whether it's disparities in healthcare or economics or infant mortality among certain demographics, the casualty is truth. And so my training is as a physician, and in October of this last year, the New England Journal of Medicine, which is probably the number 2 most prestigious journal in the world in science, wrote in an editorial for the first time ever in its over 105-year history, it talked about something other than medicine. And its title was this, Dying in a Leadership Vacuum. And here's the statement it made, and I left my notes at home, but I'll paraphrase it. It says that COVID-19 and the pandemic has caused every country to be stressed to its limits. The U.S. has been the most prepared, prosperous, scientifically advanced nation in the world. But we have managed in our country to turn a crisis into a tragedy. The projection in February of this last year, I was in a group that talked about COVID-19, and we projected in the U.S. we're going to lose in the first year up to 40,000 people. And as of today, almost 10 times that have died in this country alone. We had a similar conference talking about Africa and the third world nations and how we must garner our resources to help them to escape devastating death. And yet, countries like South Africa and others have had less than 1/100th of the death we've had here. The pandemic is not simply biologic. It is much deeper than that. It's because we have abandoned truth. As my colleague has said, we listen to people now who speak as if they know, but they only have an opinion, and unfortunately, they often have another motive. And so I remember back in March when some of my friends and government said to me, Dr. Smith, why is it that African Americans and brown people are dying in COVID at such an alarming rate, and we are so surprised? I said to them, why are you surprised? Why are you surprised by the 2.5 times death among black and brown persons when you know that they live in endemic conditions that already marginalize their health and their well-being? So why are you surprised? All COVID did was reveal the truth that's been there for over 400 years in this country. All COVID did was to show us, because of technology like cell phones with cameras, that injustice, even by police, that I support overall, but condemn when they don't act as professionals, take the lives of certain people like they're nothing. The casualty is truth. We no longer start with the truth. We start with opinions. We start with flawed systems. We talk about systemic racism, but do nothing to change the system. In my field of medicine, you cannot simply give Tylenol for a fever. It is called symptomatic treatment, and it's a dereliction of duty. You must find the cause, no matter what the depth of it is, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how shameful, no matter how long it's been in existence. And unless you deal with the cause, you're going to lose the patient. I am concerned about our faith in that even in our churches, we've been reluctant to speak pointedly to the truth. And until we understand our common humanity, all of us made in his image, all of us after his likeness, all of us deserve equal treatment, all of us, no matter how long the inequity has been, all of us. And until we enunciate that, until we as a community stand on that, we'll only be given Tylenol for a fever.
Thank you so much. Reverend Kirshner, would you speak to us?
Yes, it's hard not to amen with all of this. As I begin, I do also want to thank, though, my colleague, the Reverend Dr. Lucy Forster Smith, as well as the entire Michigan Avenue crew for their energy in pulling this event together. And I also want to join my voice with Lucy's and publicly welcome our distinguished guests for their energy, their time, and sharing their brilliance with us as we wrestle together what it means to follow Jesus in these days. I am honored to be the pastor here at Fourth Church as we embark next month on our 150th anniversary of being church. My accent gives me away. I'm not a native Chicagoan. This is my 6th winter here in the city, which is how I mark my time since I am a native Texan. But I am glad to be here and to claim this city, this beautiful and broken city, as my home. When the seriousness of the pandemic began to make itself known really last March, right at the beginning of the season of Lent, causing us, like everyone else in here, to change just about every aspect of how we are church together, I never would have predicted that almost a year later, I would be faced again with planning Lent and Easter worship, still caught in the grasp of COVID-19. As well as in the middle of such a chaotic and painful season in our national life. So I want to focus really on how this has affected my own faith. I have to admit to all of you this evening that I have found myself sometimes struggling to hold on to resilience and to a tenacity of faith. During this last season and fall in particular, I know for a fact there were some Sundays where I was having to preach myself back into faith and back into trust. And I know I'm not the only preacher who has felt that way, nor is this the only time in my ministry. At different points in the last 20 years of my ministry, I've occasionally experienced those moments of blank pages on the computer screen on a Saturday evening where there should be, by that point, words for a sermon. But I freely confess that this pandemic and increased temperature and rage in our political and national life have certainly caused more sleepless nights and more blocks of creativity than normal. That's partly my personality. I'm such a planner that I have to plan to be spontaneous. I'm not so great at the jazz and the improv, Dr. Smith. And yet the last 11 months of my life, our collective life, have forced me to learn anew, to use a Texas colloquial saying, how to sit more loosely in the saddle of my ministerial work. To be more willing to try some new things or to do some new things differently, even though I'm having to learn how to do all of it as I go. To be more comfortable or perhaps more okay with being uncomfortable, with having to make and change plans constantly, always praying, though, that we are being Spirit-led. To be more spiritually reflective, I might say I'm learning how to float more in the river of God's love and to let the currents of that love carry me, even when I don't know where exactly I'm going. That's actually an image my father, a retired preacher, has been using in his own prayer life and one he shared with me last week, and I'm now trying to adopt it. This sense of being carried by God's love. Being able to feel like I don't have to constantly paddle or try to get somewhere on my own power, but rather practice a trust that I can let go and float, and I will be held up by the power and the love of God. And that's one way these past months have affected my own faith. The second way, though, is related. I'm also learning to lean in even more deeply into that holy power and divine promise of surrounding love as I consider how I, as a white church leader, am being summoned into honesty and repentant and repairing action for the myriad of ways I have either averted my eyes from or kept silent about the insidious tentacles of racism and white supremacy, because not seeing and not speaking out were easier routes for me to take. I had that privilege. One way that was easier was because it meant that fewer people in my own congregation would become angry with me. Although when I look back, that's not the whole truth. Fewer white people in my congregation would become angry with me. But my aversion and my silence did nothing for the black and brown folks in the church and on our church staff. As a matter of fact, it only added to a sense of not being seen or cared for or valued. So I am coming to terms with that. And every day I try to do better. And I try to resist the power of fear and my own antipathy toward conflict. And I pray to do that work without getting stuck in any white guilt, because frankly, that doesn't do anyone any good, and it can be an excuse for not doing anything. Rather, my desire, driven by my desire to follow Jesus, is to be of use in helping God's will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. For I do believe strongly, to follow up what Dr. Smith just shared, that the continual work of anti-racism is one of the primary calls for the church today. And we've started that journey here at Fourth Church, but it's going to be a long and a hard one. In part because we as a congregation, we're not all on the same page about its necessity or about how to speak of it or how to go about it. And yet, that doesn't let us off the hook. Because we trust that God is in the midst of us and will keep prodding us and pushing us into practicing what we preach, which is the liberating, love-filled, justice-making reign of God. For if even the rocks are going to cry out in honor and praise of Jesus and his inauguration of the reign of God, how can we keep silent? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd now like to invite Reverend Moss, if you would please speak to us.
Well, I join with everyone else with our thanksgiving for having the opportunity to be here at Fourth Presbyterian. This church has truly been a witness and a citadel of hope in this city that is greatly challenged. And I'm delighted to be here with this tremendous group of thought leaders, ministers, theologians. And you see the how it works here. You see you have the bishop and the pastor emeritus at the top. You have the prime minister right here in the middle, and you have the security protocol right here. So we're just providing security. We're on the main floor, and so we just appreciate that. But again, I'm grateful for this opportunity to be with you all. It is probably one of the great guitarists. Rolling Stone says that he probably gave one of the greatest guitar solos if you look at the 100 great guitar solos. A gentleman by the name of T-Bone Walker, who ended up putting together a song that had been passed down from mouth to ear. Some call it Stormy Monday, and it simply went this way. They call it Stormy Monday, but Tuesday's just as bad. Wednesday's worse, but Thursday's oh so sad. Friday, the eagle flies. Saturday, I go out to play. But you will find me Sunday on my knees in church to pray. That T-Bone Walker was attempting to share with those who were in the Southern tradition and those who were outside that there is a merging, that if you want to live life, that you must be able to face the blues. And one of the challenges that we have witnessed in this moment is that America is struggling with a new genre and a new song. And those songs are blues songs. There was a young man recently who I saw wearing a shirt that spoke to our moment in an interesting way, Pastor Ozzie. The shirt said, "America wants our rhythm, but not our blues." And we are in a moment where America is struggling with this new song of the blues. That the blues forces us to face suffering. But truly, if you engage the blues, you have a choice whether or not you want to live in despair. One way to put it is this way, is that suffering is inevitable, but misery is your choice. And America is struggling with this idea of, can we face the blues of our history and face the blues of our current crisis? Because we have been living in a country that is very comfortable with simplistic pop songs that speak about that everything is going to be all right. But the reality is that we are facing a blue moment. And we've got to learn how to play the blues as a nation. It is the Greater Chicago Food Depository that is speaking about the fact that as a result of COVID-19 and COVID-16-19, we are now facing a food insecurity tsunami in this city. It will be one of the greatest increases that we have seen of people who are food insecure. And what the Greater Chicago Food Depository discovered is that many people who worked and volunteered, they always thought it was other people who were in crisis who experienced the blues. And now they are discovering that people who look just like them, who they thought were volunteering to assist other people, are now singing blues songs. Food insecurity and hunger, two different things. That this crisis has created. We can, as Bishop Smith has already spoken about, COVID-19, but this food insecurity and hunger crisis is in and around COVID-16-19. Food insecurity is different from hunger. Hunger means you go to bed hungry. You have no food. Food insecurity is, I got $600 from the government, but my rent is $500. So I now have to discover, what will I do with the 100? Get my medication that I need to survive, feed my children so that they have the necessary nutrition. That we now have people who are making critical decisions such as the blues. And if we are, as a city, going to be able to experience and deal and face the blues, we need to borrow from maybe a great prophet by the name of Zora Neale Hurston, that in her book, Their Eyes Are Watching God, that there is a story when the main character, that they were sitting on a raft looking into the storm, knowing that this storm was probably going to wipe them out. And the statement is, it looked as if they were staring in the darkness, but their eyes were watching God. This is a season where we've got to learn how to stare into the darkness, face our tragedy, not fall into despair, but know that suffering is inevitable. But as a nation, we can choose whether misery, crisis, and destruction will be our choice.
Wow. Mr. Crawford,
Thank you. Thank you.
would you please speak to us tonight?
Oh, thank you. It is a delight to be here. I am humbled to be in the company of these pastors. As many of you may know, I am neither a pastor nor an academic, but a lawyer, a reformed lawyer or a recovering lawyer. I'm not sure which, but I've been blessed. I've been blessed. Pastor Moss mentioned we're sitting kind of here in the security lane up here up front. I will share with you, you had asked us for a bit of personal reflection, and I cannot speak as eloquently or beautifully as each of my co-panelists have spoken to the devastating impact of COVID-19, of COVID-16-19. I watched Pastor Moss give that speech down in Washington Park after our march down Martin Luther King Drive over the summer, and that has stuck with me. But I sit here today in a place that formed in large part my faith. I lean on that. I lean on that each and every day, just as I lean on the faith of our community at the McCormick Theological Seminary. I'm sitting in a spot here where both my daughters were baptized and walked down this row over the last 20 years. Just right there by Pastor Moss is where the people of this congregation laid their hands upon me, where I became a ruling elder in the Presbyterian Church and a member of the session. It is here that led me to McCormick. I had no idea what happened at McCormick Theological Seminary. I knew a little bit about it. I knew there were extraordinary scholars. I knew there were great preachers. And I sit here today in awe of the fact that I'm here with four of the preeminent preachers in this country. In fact, we have a little rule at McCormick. I generally like to speak first because I don't want to follow all of the great preachers we have. So I begin tonight really with a moment of gratitude as I look at this sanctuary, a sanctuary that is in many ways connected to our history also at McCormick. The funds that, about half the funds that built this building, as Leszek probably knows, and some of you know from the history of this building, came from Nettie Fowler McCormick. Nettie Fowler McCormick was truly the great benefactor of our seminary. We wouldn't be here today without her. That window, I believe, is named for her. And so there are these long historic connections between this place and McCormick Theological Seminary, and there are so many deep connections right here on this floor to my own life that have been sustaining through the weeks and months of what we have been through. You asked us to speak a bit about faith in times of uncertainty, and I'm sure my colleagues here could speak to all of the moments of uncertainty that are found in Scripture. And we do live in especially challenging times, and certainly unprecedented, no doubt, for us as individuals. But in reality, we have lived through these times before. In the grand arc of history, there have been plagues and pandemics. There have been white nationalist, demagogic leaders that we have had to stand up to. So these things, in some respects, are not new. How we respond to it is where we have to find ways to come together. What comes out of this is what will matter. How we take on that new normal. If we decide that all we want to do is go back to what it was, then we failed. We failed as church leaders. We failed in education. If we cannot say, particularly at this time, in this moment, in this city, how do we take on these problems? As Bishop Smith alluded to, just the Tylenol is not enough anymore. And so we have these challenges before us, and I am grateful to serve where I serve. I have an extraordinary group of people that hold me up when I need to be held up, and we have held each other up through this, and we have gone through change. But as I reflect on this, just actually yesterday, I recorded a welcome for what will be our 16th annual praise and worship service for Martin Luther King Jr. That's organized by Reverend Dr. Stacy Edwards Dunn, who is also at Trinity and part of our McCormick family. And as I reflected on this issue of uncertainty, I recalled that 2 years ago, as I drove down to Progressive Community Church to offer a welcome in person at that time, it was the night that Jason Van Dyke received his sentence, just under 7 years for the murder of Laquan McDonald. It was an uncertain time in this city. And we face an uncertain time today, and we have not yet fully addressed even those issues that grew out of the murder of Laquan McDonald. We were able to push to get the consent decree, and with all due respect to all of our city leaders and all of the challenges they have faced, we have not implemented the consent decree. We have it before us, and we have work to do on getting the consent decree. We saw progress in Springfield and the adoption of the criminal justice reform bill, but there are pieces of that we will have to implement, which is going to require all of us working together, not just working on our own respective missions, not just the service work we do, but the policy work that needs to be done that Trinity and so many other church leaders have participated in. We need to come together. We need to take on these challenges, and we need to solve these problems. And so I'm grateful for this opportunity to be with you, and I am truly honored and humbled to be in the company of these four extraordinary leaders.
Continue this conversation, and it really ties in so beautifully with what Mr. Crawford was talking about in terms of the role of faith communities and religious leadership and also institutions. And so what we'd like to do now is to open up about a half an hour conversation with all of you. And in this section, our camera crew may have a little bit of challenge to be able to zero in on each of you as you're speaking. So just be patient. Mostly what we'll be doing is a view of all of you together, but feel free to speak. And if you're speaking, take your masks off. And if you're going to take a moment of pause for a moment, you can leave them off, but please have them on if you are not speaking for a bit. There are really two questions at the center of this particular portion of our forum. The first is, what is the role of faith and religious institutions in these unsettled times? And secondly, how can our faith communities work together to rebuild society and become a unifying force here in Chicago? So the one on the question of the role, and then secondly, how do you understand or imagine working together? So anyone can begin, and I'm not going to call on you this time.
I go back to God's question to the prophet Elijah in 1 Kings 19. What are you doing here? But it's a collective question tonight in terms of the church, in terms of pastors and people. What are we doing here in this pandemic, in this time of uncertainty? And that is the question that caused Elijah to come out of the cave, because we can't hide anymore. It's here, and so it isn't doing. It was Howard Thurman who said, the effort is the result of doing something. The effort, faith being the result, the effort being the result of faith. that we do something. There's so much to be done that we can't do it all. As my father's always said, you can't dance on every record, but you can dance on the one that you know and the one that you can do. And so my late childhood pastor, when we talk about songs, Otis, Dr. W. Herbert Brewster always said that some things are better sung about than talked about. It's in singing that we move ourselves. I'm not saying we sing and do nothing, but that's why they call them work songs. That's why they call them songs that they sang while they were picking cotton and with their backs bent over. They could sing and work that whole row. And when you're singing and you're working, as Thelonious Monk said, ain't no wrong notes on that piano. So whatever you come up with singing, what B.B. King said, my song is a serious matter. It reflects what I feel. If I say I love you, I mean it, because every word in my song is for real. I like to live the life that I sing about in my song. And so there are no wrong steps when we stand up to do something. When we stand up and stare racism in the face and say, you are wrong, like Ibram X. Kendi's title that he says we could take on, all of us being anti-racist, blacks being anti-racist, whites being anti-racist. Racism is a disease. And so when we do something about it, it's what Dr. King did. He got up and said it's time out for sitting in the sanctuary being anesthetized by sun coming through the stained glass windows, but going out on the streets and getting our shoes run over, getting in good trouble. What are we doing here?
Thank you for that, Reverend Ozzie. I was sent yesterday by a member of our faculty, Dr. Jennifer McBride, whom Reverend Ozzie knows well, Pastor Moss probably knows as well. Jennifer is one of the world's leading experts on Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and she's currently the president of the Bonhoeffer Society English Language Section, and the board at the Bonhoeffer Society put out a statement earlier this week calling for the removal of the President of the United States. And this appeared in Sojourners Online, and if I may, I'd just like to read it because I think it speaks to the question. And it's quoting, talking about Bonhoeffer, and on the day of the baptism of his godson in May of 1944, Bonhoeffer speaks into a context much like our own, where the dominant church, consumed by the pursuit of its own power and preservation, has not only tolerated but supported authoritarian leadership. That is what the Society wrote earlier this week. Bonhoeffer argues, they say, that given this troubling reality, Christians have lost their ability to proclaim a life-giving word to the world, because the words we used before must lose their power. We can be Christians today in only two ways, he said, through prayer and in doing justice among human beings. And it seems to me, speaking at least in the context of seminaries, if we are not acting on our faith, if we are not engaging in the world, if our curriculum does not engage the future leaders of the church in the world in this moment, then we failed, because I think we become something less than relevant. I think that's also true of an awful lot of churches. We have to get out of the building. And we have to it's not just about the service and the mission are critical. It's what brings us together. It's part of being a community. But it is getting beyond the care of giving a Tylenol to somebody with a fever. It is how do we solve together these problems? How do we act upon those? And so as we faced this process, just as one example, we have worked with Westminster Presbyterian Church up in Minneapolis. We did a webinar series called Isolation and Perspective, because somebody in the congregation had said something to the effect like, well, it's like being in prison to be in this lockdown. And somebody said, we need to talk. If you think sort of a stay-at-home order is equivalent to being in jail, then come with us. Come with us to the jail. And it's not enough just to go and pray at the jail. As we started a program at Cook County Jail 3 years ago, and it has been transformative for us. I am ashamed as a lawyer that it has taken me this long in my lifetime to understand what goes on behind the walls at Cook County Jail is one example. And so the work we do there is not just to deliver theological education, but in fact to pull together partners who can identify the problems, work with the county, work with the city, work to change policy. We have to get active in the change of the law. When I look around the city, or we see it all the time, and I think we saw it most vividly and graphically in the violent invasion of Anjanette Young's apartment here in this city when she was stripped of her Fourth Amendment rights and all of her dignity. Standing there naked and screaming 43 times, you have the wrong place. You have the wrong place. We need to find ways to stand up and not only speak with her and stand with her, we need to make sure that doesn't happen again. But that takes concerted effort. We can't do it alone, but I think the church, I think seminaries, this is what it means to be faithful in our Christian witness.
I think on a very small way, our churches, again, had to repent. So we have a lot of preachers in our church, a lot of ministers. They do good work. But I have to confess that if you go back in our church 9 months, I have 10 times as many people involved in active daily ministry than ever before. We've birthed 2 or 3 new ministries. One is called the Touch Ministry. We started with 200 people calling 20 people a week. We now have 300 calling 20 a week, so we call 6,000 people every week. It started with our church members, and now people have heard about it, and whoever you are, you can call in, and we will call you and say, who are you, and what's your life like? How can we help you? The church has never been so energized with those people, ministers who are now actively involved in people's lives. Who are you? How can we get to know you? What can we do for you? And it's taken a whole new energy level in our assembly. We started out some time ago with the food insecurity, and I said to the church, we will pay for this out of our own operating funds. We never gave away less than 250 boxes every week to families of 4, the highest quality food, high quality meats, and so forth. 3 months later, we got a call from a friend of mine and said, I heard what you're doing, wrote a check for $30,000. One of our universities heard about it. 2 months later, same check, $30,000, and is sending 10 volunteers every week. We're seeing ministry on a level that we should have been doing before, but we weren't. Now we're getting people from the Hispanic, Asian population coming over. How can we help? And their people coming alongside. So I think that in the midst of what is evil, the Lord can stir the heart of the church to understand the comprehensive nature of our humanity demands that we think broader for all people. And again, what we found out in stewardship is that we funded it the first 6 months. Now it's being funded. The government now has come to the end of their funding. And our church said, what are we going to do, Bishop? I said, we're going to keep on doing it at the same level. And I guarantee you, he will make a way for us to do that. That makes church real for people. It makes the worth of the body of Christ clear on an individual level, and it bursts something that I think is unstoppable. So in the midst of the pain and the blues, and we're not choosing misery, we're choosing the blues, but the rhythm has gotten brighter, and we're more excited now in our 100-year history of our church than we've ever been before.
I agree. I mean, the church has literally left the building, right? So we're trying to figure out how to live that out. But boy, it will be something that we as church leaders and as congregations are going to have to deal with, not to just try and go back to the way it was. Right. Because I'm tired. I know everybody's tired, right? And so it would be easy to just fall back into the old rhythms of the way things were, Well, those marches last summer were great, I'm so glad we did that. Speaking as someone who could choose to opt in or out. But that's going to be the temptation, I think, for our congregation and for perhaps some of yours, is not to then get lulled back into familiar routine, but to seek out new partnerships and new ways of being advocates here in the city for the folks who don't have their voices heard. And I think that and to get beyond just kind of surviving. I mean, I think that's what's been the most frustrating for me, is that I've had to constantly say, don't just get through this week, let's also look ahead. And I know we'll get to that in the last section of our talk, but there are ways where I think that there is something new being born, but we have to be awake to see it and to help it along. And that takes us also lifting our heads to see each other too in that work, and making some commitments to that's how we want to use our energy and time. So now that's all recorded, so now I'll have to actually do that.
Very good.
It's fascinating to me that in this moment when we talk about faith and unsettled times, is that faith is designed for unsettled times. There's not a scripture you read that there was not a colonial press, there was not a divided nation, there was not an oppressed people. From Genesis to Revelation, there is no joyous, perfect moment, but yet in our, Americanism, we want to separate that and make that normative. And this moment has, as you said, Pastor Shannon, the church has left the building, has forced us to use a gospel methodology and not just theology. Yes. Because Jesus never had a building, so foxes.
Jesus went on ahead of them to Galilee, right?
Absolutely. And so we got caught into, in some ways, a Pharisaic approach in terms of how we do ministry. That we must be in a building. And there's nothing wrong with the ritual and building and all of that. I'm not against that. I'm saying that we created an idol out of the way we did worship. When in actuality, this should just be a time, a moment. It should be a ritual that points us to the true meaning, but then we deified the ritual and forgot the meaning in the process. So this moment, I think, is just re-energized, and it has shifted the way that we do ministry. For what we have done in reference to food insecurity, partnering with the Greater Chicago Food Depository, but then how we do worship, utilizing cinematic techniques. So we've moved from theater to cinema, because you cannot replicate theater in cinema, and vice versa. You can't replicate cinema and theater. So when we think through how we do worship, we now think through, is this a close-up, intimate shot that communicates to the congregation? Is there movement in the camera that also demands that we are to lean in? Or is the music that is underneath and also what is around you all communicating theologically? And I think Fourth Presbyterian is a great example. We've been doing this for quite some time. Your building preaches. And we forget that the theology and the architecture, so that means the architecture of how we do worship also needs to preach versus just saying, let's do what we've always done before. So now, when we come out of this, there are some people who will never come back into this building, but will only stream with you. So how do we create an experience that allows them to get into good trouble, connect with the faith tradition, so that they can have a methodology that allows them to have an active faith where they are engaging the issues that you're talking about, Bishop. And I think that this is one of the most alive moments for the faith community, because we have been forced to reckon with our true history. And I think that that's what's exciting, I think, that God is showing in this moment.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think we'll move to our last segment, but it builds on this one, so we're not going to wrap that. But I think that one of the things that our committee was really interested in having you address, and I think it's more relevant today than we ever imagined, is the issue of the future. And so, of course, the title of the forum is Faith in Uncertain Times, Reflecting on the Past, Envisioning the Future. And it came to me as we were sitting here realizing that it's not only the 150th anniversary of this congregation, but the 150th anniversary of the Chicago fire. And I can't help but think that a lot of things arose out of those ashes. And there is something powerful to me about that image in terms of thinking of the way that we stand in a world that feels like a lot of things have been burned down, both literally and figuratively, and you have spoken to that tonight. But the question of the future is not only one for at the whim or fussing of seers and futurists, but God's future is one of intention and beckoning and creating the beloved community. And so now I ask you to respond to the questions about the future and hope. So how do we survive, thrive, and flourish in these historic times? And what is your biggest hope for the future? And again, I would like to invite you to do this in the order that I'm going to ask you to do, and we will begin actually with you, Reverend Moth.
I believe that this moment, these times, require that we discover the sacred song in us. We reacquaint ourselves with the spiritual disciplines, one being prayer and scripture and building community. Howard Thurman says it. It says you can only go upward if you go inward. That one must begin to mine the inner reaches of one's spirit if you truly want to grow, and then you have to confront yourself. He says that there is an inward sea in all of us, and in that inward sea there is an island, and on that island is an altar, and before you can get to that altar you have to pass by an angel that has the flaming sword. And when you get past that angel and you get to that altar, then you will find what's most genuine in yourself. And that is the moment that you will grow and you will realize that you had a brush with God, though you were not able to contain nor hold God. And so that becomes critical for us in these moments. And again, having a song. And that's not just for the individual. America has yet to be able to struggle with the idea of creating a collective song for all those who are part of this country. Because we have always tried to create a hierarchy versus to create, and I borrow from Pastor Ozzy, who is the jazz musician, instead of creating a democratic jazz band. Because jazz bands by nature teach democracy, because it is only in jazz that you take instruments that are specifically not supposed to play with each other. The saxophone was for a marching band. The piano was for European classical music. The trap drum set was specifically to be played in a particular type of rhythm and not poly-African rhythms. And the bass was you were supposed to use a bow. You're not supposed to use your fingers in order to keep rhythm. And then, but yet within jazz, everybody gets the right to solo. In other words, I can bring my own unique cultural heritage to the table, And I will never have the drum set tell the saxophone, you gotta sound like me. America demands that we emulate instead of innovate when it comes to our spiritual growth and development. And so I believe that when we learn the jazz of democracy and bring forth all of the unique cultural heritage that everybody brings to the table, then we create a new song, or to borrow from New Orleans, we create some good gumbo in the process. One or the other, but I think that becomes the demand.
Mr. David Crawford, would you be willing to speak to us about the future and hope and sing it out?
Oh, I'm loving the music. I have actually another Fourth Church moment on multiple occasions when Dave Brubeck used to play here in the sanctuary, or an album I pulled out of my dad's collection of Duke Ellington playing sacred music at Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church in New York. That's hope. It is hope. I think as, again, we think about celebrating the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr., I find, again, back to Pastor Moss's points, all of those points, by the way, that he made about churches and buildings, and you could apply, it's the same thing in seminaries and theological education generally. But there is hope in the midst of this. We've seen over these last days and weeks and months, but particularly impressed on our memories is what's happened over this last week. And we've seen people try to create these moral equivalencies between what happened over the summer and what happened when our capital was stormed and overtaken by insurrectionists attempting an armed coup d'etat. These things are not the same. And while that is a moment of despair, a moment of infamy that Chuck Schumer said, again, our second moment of infamy, the day before that was a day of great hope. On January 5th, Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock was elected United States Senator from the state of Georgia. John Ossoff was elected, a former colleague of aide to Representative John Lewis in the state of Georgia. So we have this contrast of this moment of hope, but we know how much work it took to make that happen. And so I think I take from that, even in the midst of all we face today, an opportunity. I think as we think about Romans 5 and we think about that process of suffering and trouble and building the endurance that leads us to something beyond to character and to hope, we're sort of in this endurance phase, and we are building ourselves towards, we ought to be building ourselves towards something better. And I think there's an opportunity for all of us to do that, and I hope you all have been partners at one level or another at McCormick forever. And if there is anything we can do together, that's where my hope comes from.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll now turn to Bishop Smith.
I appreciate the fact I can speak in the middle of this part about hope. I tend to be a more Lamentations type person in my latter years. Last week I listened to a lecture by Dr. King from 1967. It was as if he was sitting next to me here in Chicago. It brought tears to my eyes that he was so on point 52 years later. I think one of the dangers of what we call hope is what I think Glaude called false improvement. If we don't deal with the issues of the narrative that's true history in our country, we are not going to survive this. Personally, I hurt for my grandchildren. I do not want my 7 grandchildren to fight a fight that Dr. King fought. I can't wait for people to make improvement. We need to become radical. If we say there's a systemic problem, then stop feeding the system. We know that in medicine, if the problem is systemic, you can only treat the symptom for so long. You will lose control of the war. And so I think that in our church, especially, we have to stop being safe. Until we can have a unified narrative of what happened in 1619. The reason that Wednesday happened was because millions of people believed the big lie. The most secure election in the history of America is questioned, and then 169 elected officials want to subvert it. How do you address a blatant lie as if it's truth? And so we've got to start getting together and saying, what is the truth about our nation? And when you tell me it's the greatest country in the world, I agree with you, but don't tell me be quiet about it. I can quote the Constitution. I can quote the Declaration. My wife says, you are dyed-in-the-wool American. I know the history inside and out, and I abhor the fact that we live hypocritically. We tell the people we're all equal. You're lying to me. I'm a physician. I'm a scientist. You cannot tell me I can take a kid's zip code and with 85% accuracy predict their outcome. That hurts me. I'm not cynical, but I am clear that we've got to understand that Band-Aid won't work if good white people and people in the evangelical church don't begin to understand the truth and stand with good brown and black people and say it. It's not going to change. I've gotten too old to wait. I can't wait no more. We need to understand that we must start with a declarative truth together in public arenas. We must be insistent, we must be persistent, and we must not back down. Because if we don't, then we are building on a false issue of improvement. I lived in the Jim Crow era. I lived in affirmative action where they thought they were doing me a favor, and I resent it because I don't want you to give me a handout. Give me a chance to prove who I am. I don't want you to adopt my kids. I want you to create a society where the parents who are black and brown can care for their own kids. We don't want people to be paternalistic. We want human dignity. And I think that's the hope that the church has to really hold on to. The church, I believe, is the only possible remedy for real change. And I mean the entire church. And so I think if leaders in the church will stop giving us Band-Aid answers, platitudes, let's do the work that is difficult but necessary, and then the hope will spring eternal. And so I do have hope, but I think that there is, in my spirit, a deep urgency. And if we don't answer that, I don't know what we're going to do. If Dr. King's speech in '67 is on point today, 52 years later, don't tell me to wait. Don't tell me to be patient. I can't. It will take 10 generations for kids to have a right education. We know what to do. We're smart people. We've got resources. I'm going to close with this. I was on the board of World Vision for 9 years. I was most enthralled by our theme, their vision statement. I'll close. Our prayer for every child is life in all its fullness. But our vision for every child is life in all its fullness. But our prayer for every heart is the will to make it so. We know what to do. We know the solutions. We are afraid. We are afraid. And we must have the spiritual courage to stop being afraid and start with loudness and assertiveness saying to people, it's got to change now. And if we do that, we'll find out that we'll make real progress and we'll see it in our lifetime. And so I apologize for going over time, but I don't apologize because I'm 71 years old and I ain't waiting no more, and I'm not going to be quiet no more. I'm going to be offensive if I have to. We've got to make a change for our children and for our own selves. That's my hope.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Smith.
When you talk about the future and the church, one of the statements that I've always said when I was pastoring, and Bishop Smith, I'm 70. I'm 70, so this is my 71st year too. And I grew up in Memphis where Dr. King. I was a senior in high school when he was assassinated. But I used to always tell the church, we got to keep the concrete wet. And I was wondering where did that come from? I come from a family of bricklayers. I'm the brick masons. I'm the only one that's not a brick mason. But when my father would lay brick, I had to keep his mortar wet. And sometimes when he put a brick down, he had to pick it back up because it wasn't in line. But you don't let the mortar get hard, or else you can't move the brick again. And so when we have had captive audiences in our church for years. Now what we have on virtual is a distracted audience. And so I want to propose that we become theologically distracted all the time, such as Martin King would call it creatively maladjusted to sameness. And one of the things, when the disciples were in this building and were just in awe of the stones, Jesus said not one will be left on top of another. And it wasn't until I went to the Holy Land and saw Caesarea Philippi, which used to be a massive structure, it's just a pile of rocks now. It won't stand. This stuff is coming down. This is, pardon the phrase if we're talking business, bricks and mortar. Bricks and mortar just don't work anymore. And so we have a distracted, we have a distracted people out there now. We should be always theologically distracted. Why? Because that's why jazz is called the form that most people don't like is called straight ahead or avant-garde. It's always going somewhere else. And nobody gets to leave humming what they just heard because it's always pointing beyond itself. And Jesus was always pointing beyond himself. And we should always be pointing beyond the last sermon because the sermon is a moment. And I don't care how good it is, if it were good, everybody would float out of here and do something. But keeping the concrete wet is where is I think what the future ought to be. If Jeremiah Wright's sermon in 2008 can become true in Georgia in 2021, it's something about that. He said the chickens have come home to roost, and it ended interesting. He was a Southern expression in Georgia. Went from red to blue. But that's not as important as the prophetic, because prophets, as your father always says, Otis, prophets make us angry. They disturb our creeds and our customs. They unsettle our sameness. I'm through.
Okay, Shannon, could you?
Whew. I think we survive and we thrive and we flourish also by remembering and acting out of the truth that we don't do any of this alone. That this is an opportunity, but we're always accompanied by the presence of God, and that no one is outside of God's realm of redemption, that it's never too late to do right. The other truth out of which we act is that we are also all tied together. Whether we see it or not, whether we want to recognize that or not, or we celebrate it or not, we're not just meant to tolerate, but we're meant to embrace. I think also, and this gets to what Dr. Smith was saying, Bishop Smith, we are to be a people of truth. And as people who follow Jesus, for us, truth is known most vividly, of course, in the person of Jesus Christ. But we also must appreciate and affirm the arts of science and medicine and poetry and honest history. I think that something we've been talking about as a church staff is that we have to have courageous conversations with each other, listening to understand rather than to offer a retort, purposefully seeking out diverse voices, embracing ambiguity, being willing to be changed by what we hear. Because I think if we as church could learn to trust each other, to move beyond being nice, to be real and authentic, then I believe God could and would do something with that. For I find hope, actually, I find hope in the pain and in the struggle, because we can't have Easter if we don't have Good Friday. And from what I know as a mother, you can't have new creation without the pain and struggle of birth. So my prayer in these days is that the church might be a midwife for what the Spirit of the Lord is up to in and among us. And that's where I find hope. And I find hope also in my siblings who are gathered around here who are doing the honest ministry of keeping the mortar wet and of speaking the truth in love and making us practice what we preach, because we can do this. God is waiting on us to do this for the healing of our city and for the healing of our nation. And we can't just go back to the way things were. There are no such thing. The good old days were never good for everybody. And so it's time to move ahead.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight on this rainy January night. And we are so privileged to be moved and awakened in this Michigan Avenue Forum. We're grateful for the panelists and for their generous reflections. And we are grateful for this amazing city of Chicago, with its history, though riddled, and with leaders who speak out but also speak up in moments and times like this, in bringing light and hope and God's empowering love to us. And so this evening's program has been recorded and will be available for viewing in the next days. And I would ask you all to join me in prayer as we move beyond this place into our lives this night. So let us pray. Great God, source of life, we stand at the anvil of justice, building your holy life into the world you hold. Give us unapologetic, revolutionary love for one another, offering care and courageous hope through the power, light, and unrelenting joy of Jesus. Come to us, abide with us, O God, Emmanuel, through these days, these hours, these precious moments of our lives. Amen. Thank you for joining us, and good night.